Hello and welcome to this 2021 EMCC Global Conference session, where we're going to be exploring some of the issues that are facing humanity and thinking about what we need to do as coaches. We come to this from a very hopeful place, and we hope that we can hold some dialogue for you today and really get you thinking about some of these issues. So my name's Rita Symons. I'm a coach, a mentor and a supervisor, and I'm actually the president of EMCC UK, and I'm delighted to introduce my colleagues. Perhaps Riza, shall I hand over to you?
Sure, this is Riza Kadilar. You'll find me, all over the place in EMCC. Hey, by the way, I just wonder, do you read these things in the correct way, or is it reversed?
We read it in the correct way, Riza.
That's perfect. That's perfect. And I don't need to mirror my image or whatever. So perfect. So this is Riza and Eve.
And my name's Eve Turner, and I'm a member of the EMCC, a coach supervisor, and I'm also chair of the professional body APEX. And we thought we'd start with some words and some pictures and some music, and that can tell a story better than we can. So this video, the poem is by somebody called Drew Dellinger in the United States, and it's been set to music and pictures by Pioneers, who kindly gave us permission to use it today.
It's 3:23 in the morning, and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something when the seasons started failing, as the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying. Did you fill the streets with protest when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? I'm riding home on the coma train. I've got the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I have teams of scientists feeding me data daily, and pleading I immediately turn it into poetry. I want just this consciousness reached by people in range of secret frequencies contained in my speech. I am the desirous earth, equidistant to the underworld and the flesh of the stars. I am everything already lost. The moment the universe turns transparent and all the light shoots through the cosmos, I use words to instigate silence. I'm a hieroglyphic stairway in a buried Mayan city, suddenly exposed by a hurricane, a satellite circling Earth, finding dinosaur bones in the Gobi Desert. I am telescopes that see back in time. I am the precession of the equinoxes, the magnetism of the spiraling sea. I'm riding home on the coma train, with the voice of the Milky Way in my dreams. I am myths where violets blossom from blood like dying and rising gods. I'm the boundary of time, soul encountering soul, and tongues of fire. It's 3:23 in the morning, and I can't sleep because my great-great-grandchildren ask me in dreams, what did you do while the earth was unraveling?
Wow, that was a really powerful film, isn't it? And just such lovely music to go with it. And that's really, meant as a provocation to get us thinking. And we'll do some thinking later about what being a good ancestor means, picking up some of the themes in that film. But, you know, we are facing a difficult time as humanity. You know, there are a number of issues that and challenges that that face us. We, you know, are very focused on climate change and the biodiversity crisis. I think the issue of racial injustice has very much been brought to the fore in the last sort of 12 to 18 months, and you know, hopefully, you know, real focus on that isn't going to go away, isn't going to be, you know, the latest fad or fashion. We face as a world, as you know, global population, increased economic injustice. There is more of a divide now than there ever has been between the ultra rich and the poorer communities in our societies. And you know, a number of these things are interconnected. So, you know, if we think about climate change and some of the changes, it's actually the poorest communities in the world that are bearing the brunt. I think in the Western world, we think of this as something that's perhaps a coming threat. For other communities, it's very much a lived reality for them now. And we are also seeing political polarization and, you know, an increase in anti-democracy, and, you know, the events in the US around the election were very much a sort of signal of that, and something that, you know, probably even a couple of years ago, people would have thought unthinkable in terms of, you know, what we saw. We've been very focused on the last 12 months, haven't we, on viruses, and, you know, viruses and bacteria, you know, will always be with us. And, you know, we do have, you know, a number of risks and a number of mutations. And then to top it all off, I was reading something the other week that actually said, and in 100 years, a massive asteroid is going to hit us and obliterate the world. So it would be quite easy with all of this going on to feel quite bleak and to feel, you know, quite depressed in terms of where we are as a human race. And I think, you know, people over the last 12 months have been going through a phase where, you know, we are very up and down, and actually it's okay. And you know, that lovely phrase of it's okay to not be okay. But what we'd like to invite you to do is to just think about, why do we think as a human race we should be hopeful? And just some examples here, and then I'm going to invite Eve and Riza to give their views. So there are a number of things that we are doing that are starting to turn the tide in terms of some of those challenges that we've been presented with. So you know, there has been a massive tree planting initiative over the last sort of year or so, and that's really starting to make an impact. Obviously, it doesn't balance out the trees that are hundreds of years old in the rainforests that are being cut down, but it's a start in terms of, you know, starting to take proactive action. You may have read, you know, quite recently that, you know, we're now very hopeful that there is a vaccine for HIV. And you think about HIV and AIDS, when it first emerged, this sort of sense of hopelessness that it was just so, you know, persistent and was a death sentence. And, you know, we're in a position where that's no longer the case. We are seeing green shoots in terms of, you know, politics and you know, real peace and reconciliation. And I've just given one example here in Ethiopia, where, you know, there are real positive steps in terms of communities who've been at war for a long time, actually coming together in that sort of spirit of reconciliation. I think one of the things we have seen, and maybe this was always the case, but I think it's very it's very sort of noticeable now. I've called it the rise of the rich philanthropists. And, you know, you think about Dolly Parton donating, you know, millions of pounds to vaccine research. I mean, in the UK, where I'm based, I mean, Marcus Rashford, who's a footballer, an absolute inspiration in terms of actually changing the government's mind in terms of free school meals and free food for, you know, children who are living in poverty. So some really good steps in terms of people stepping forward, you know, taking the space and doing the right thing. We do have, you know, so many different technologies in terms of the ability to live more sustainable lives. And, you know, I think there's something interesting about what's going to create the step change to actually get us to really invest in those and get us to change those. But one of the things we were reflecting on is that there's probably quite a difference in different parts of the world. So when we talk about, you know, the solutions in the West, we tend to think about technology-based solutions. And they are, of course, you know, part of what we need to focus on and where we need to shift our investment. But there is also something about the human spirit and capacity. And I think, you know, we've got a lot to learn here from Indigenous communities. And communities who, you know, for a long, long time have lived sustainably with their environment, and they've protected and valued and nurtured their environment in a way that's allowed them to live sustainably. So, you know, one of the things we'd invite you to think about is what is the right mix there in terms of, you know, how we change the things around us and we change the world, but actually how we also change ourselves as individuals, as communities, as nations, and as a global community. So just a few things to think about there. So what we're just going to do is, you know, invite you to think about that, but maybe just give our personal perspectives. So from my point of view, I mean, I've talked about some of those things, a couple of things that make me very hopeful. One of the things that makes me very hopeful is the younger female leaders who are emerging in the world, and I particularly think of, you know, Jacinda Ardern and Sanna Marin in Finland, and they're really starting to challenge some of the assumptions in terms of, you know, how do we measure the success of a society? Is it about GDP? Is it about growth, or do we need to think about something different in terms of, you know, how we measure the success of nations? And that's one thing that makes me really, really hopeful in terms of the future. So Eve, perhaps shall I come to you? What would your sense be?
And I think we're at a coaching, mentoring and supervision conference, and I think all of those elements have such a positive role to play in this world of, if you like, inequality. And when I think of how we allow people to speak, we listen, we allow them to reflect, and we're there to simply encourage them to consider things. So when we ask who are the stakeholders for the work we're doing here, when we contract, if we allow people to really think broadly, it's amazing how many times this sort of thing comes up, and actually people really care when we give them the opportunity to talk about what's the legacy you want to leave behind, and we'll come back to that in a moment. There are so many ways we're hopeful, and what I would say is that, as in so many things, it starts with ourselves. We need to look at ourselves, what we do, and see the connections that we make. Recently, I've been involved in a piece of original research which has looked at how people view climate change and the ecological crisis. And what's clear is that people often have a real concern in their private lives, but they haven't yet made that connection with what they can do in their business lives. And I think what we're here to do is to challenge ourselves around that and encourage that. What about you, Riza?
Well, you may very well know that the very first book I published was on sustainability. It was, you know, the carbon markets, how we can find solutions, financial solutions, economic solutions to this phenomena. And what I discovered, and I will pick three topics is from the Rita's introduction. One is the concept of sustainability, the second one is change, and the third one is, I would say, harmony. Sustainability is what I discovered for the last half a century. What's really sustainable is the concept. Sustainability as a concept changed and sustained, but the core question, everything's changing. So the key question is, what are we really prepared to let go in order to, what part of our way of life we want to preserve? You know, two questions combined into one. Because if we want to sustain everything we want to do as we did all the time, we know that this is a dead end. There's only one Earth, and it's not enough. But then we need to, the second concept, to change. And this is nothing different than any other change process. The paradox of change, we all know it, you know. It's what are we going to honor in order for the resistance to disappear so that the change occurs. Very basic coaching attitude, isn't it? But somehow this change is amazing. It has always been around. All our ancestors lived through change, but never so rapid, so fast. So we are all under the pressure of questioning our core beliefs, our core values, our core behaviors, because the habitat is changing. So in my research, I've also witnessed two strategies. One is mitigation, the other one is adaptation. Mitigation is a lovely topic to discuss, but can we really mitigate? I'm not so sure, because some claim that, human impact footprint on the greenhouse gases is amazing. We can't argue against. But at the same time, we don't know what's the natural cycle of Earth, because the biggest Earth, the volcano eruption happened in the midst of 19th, 18th, 50s or whatever. So since then, we didn't really see the sulfur gases increasing, the cooling gases increasing in the atmosphere. So mitigation, big topic, we can talk, but adaptation, where I believe the climate challenge comes on an individual and also professional way that we can deal with, is the core issue. And I think we will come back at the end of our session. How can coaches play a role in that? And that will bring my third part, harmony, as you maybe mentioned in the indigenous cultures, Rita. It's true, I think it's time for West, with all this Cartesian thinking, technology, development and everything. We came here, but we all know what brings us here will not bring us there. This is a book, isn't it?
Yes.
And I like the title of this book.
Marshall Goldsmith.
Exactly. And now what brings us further is maybe a harmony that West should learn from East, from the old wisdoms and everything. So I think in this session, here we are to open all these Pandora's boxes, to let the coaches, our professionals, to find our own way in this debate.
Thank you. And we've mentioned a couple of times, and looking back at that wonderful film that's been set to Drew Dellinger's poem, what does it mean to be a good ancestor? What does it mean for each of us? And I know that for me, it's something about looking forward. So if we were, each of us, in Indigenous cultures, there's often talk of 7 generations. So looking back to our maybe great-great-grandparents and thinking of the life they had and what they would have wanted to pass on to us as their wisdom. I wonder if we each imagined a young person now in our lives, and then perhaps imagine them maybe in their 70s, 80s, 90s. What would we want them to say about us? What would we want them to say about us individually and collectively as a society and as a global society? So we'd just like to pause for a moment and give you an opportunity to think about that. And that music is so very beautiful. And actually, that's one of the things that makes me optimistic when I look at the beauty of our world, the natural beauty, the music, the poetry. There are so many things to be thankful for. And we have been such an amazing species in so many ways.
So Riza, what are your thoughts? I think what we're moving on to now is the, you know, we've given some context, we've given some provocation. So, you know, now really some time to think about what is the role of coaching? That sort of so what question for coaches, mentors and supervisors.
And that's the core of what we are going to, or what we are starting to discuss, to consider. And at the end, it will mention there are various platforms where we can take this debate further. And I'm so grateful to be with Rita and Eve. And both of you are leading different platforms as we speak now to really tackle the core issue, what coaches can play in this debate. Because, you know, the whole concept of about non-directive, non-judgmental nature of coaching, the core principles of inclusion in EMCC, one of the pillars of our core principles, and respecting diversity. These all put ourselves as coaches in a rather difficult place, and at the same time, a very resourceful place. And I think the core message of our session is to really focus on this. And you will see some questions that we share with you. So this session, our session in the breakout rooms, and the ongoing debate we'd like to build upon on this will be focused around this. What questions you may be willing to consider within this debate? Eve, would you like to continue with your comments? You're on mute, though.
Yes, thank you, Riza. And I was thinking that actually, depending where we're sitting in the world, you know, reflecting that diversity and being inclusive, what we believe coaching for won't be one thing. It's not heterogeneous. It will just, people will have slightly different approaches, slightly different reasons for it. But I think what we will all share is understanding that how we are now won't be necessarily how we are tomorrow or next year. And like any other profession, we are changing, we are needing to adapt, and we are needing to consider some of these bigger pictures. Coaching doesn't exist alone. It's part of many different systems, part of which you've already addressed by saying it's part of members watching here, part of the EMCC. So each of us needs to think about what it is we hold, maybe as a truth about coaching, as a truth about the purpose of our work and why we do what we do, even about the processes we use. I'm sure we all share that at the core, it's about listening, it's about reflecting, it's about really hearing what the other person is saying. And I think sometimes the idea that we're non-directive means we don't raise things. And I can only give an example from my own practice that when I contract with people, because I tend to work systemically, it's very straightforward to talk about, as I said earlier, who are the stakeholders to the work, and to use things like what are you trying to achieve? How will you survive, I don't know, for the year 2040, the year 2050? Because unless we adapt, and you've already mentioned that, unless we adapt, there are many organisations we may work for now that could not exist in 20, 30, 40 years' time. So I think it's about, for me, it's about flexibility. It's not about being didactic, it's being flexible, it's reflecting what's going on in society. And it's being prepared to bring in everything in our world in service of the coaching. So I'm interested, what's your thoughts, Rita?
Yeah, no, that's lovely, Eve. And what I won't do is sort of duplicate what you and Riza have said. I suppose my only other reflection is, you know, when we're working systemically in that way with clients, it's just thinking about, well, what are our skills as coaches, and I suppose, you know, in things are so challenging, aren't they, that people can sort of get into that sort of helpless space. And I think one of the really important skills we hold as coaches is actually giving people agency and a sense of control. And that feels really important in terms of, you know, humanity actually rising to the challenges that we're faced with. And so, you know, one of the things I've reflected on, and I would argue, is, you know, as coaches, we have a really, really important role here, because actually we hold a lot of the skills. You know, if you think about it, you know, our job as coaches is to, you know, broaden people's horizons, give them more, you know, help them to get more sense of control and agency and power. And, you know, belief in their ability to act and their ability to change things. And isn't that just what we need in society at the moment? So, you know, I do feel that, you know, as coaches, as you've said, even Riza, I think we need to work through that personally, but we then need to, you know, offer our skills in the space.
Mm. Yeah. And I know that when Alison Wybrow, Josie McLean and I set up the Climate Coaching Alliance, our thinking was really about a place where people could come together to discuss things, to have real dialogue, and to consider the questions, and not to feel persuaded to any particular view or any particular end, but just to have space to consider some of these bigger questions, and to do so exactly in what Riza was talking about, is the non-judgmental coaching space. So we can accelerate our own learning individually and collectively.
And maybe I can add one more thing. Is, you both know, when I joined the the Alliance, the challenge, the Climate Change Alliance, and also setting up the EMCC work group on the topic, I think one of the core questions is, what is your coaching for? So whose Lord are you serving, in another way? Because what I have discovered during the last half a century, all this debate around sustainability, climate change, climate challenge, it's a lobby game, and greenwash, people are using for different purposes. Even though maybe some of the answers seems to be the correct answer, it doesn't necessarily mean the right answer for everybody. So then, you know, as a coach, in our coaching, for what? So who is the real beneficiary of this? And I think we should also add here the concept of the whose voice is not heard in our coaching space, in our contracting, in our practice, in our professionalism. Whose voice is not heard in all this debate? But who, this empty chair, who's represented by this? I think these are all the topics that we can't really find the right answer. We all have our own opinion. But I think altogether, I do welcome those platforms, that these are great opportunities for our practitioners, for our community at large, the beneficiaries of coaching as well, not only the practitioners, but also the beneficiaries of coaching, should also come together to really discuss and to find a way forward. Because you're right, if you don't adapt, you know, there's another book, Adapt, no, yeah, or Extinct, whatever. So you're right. So that's very simple. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And hopefully that's been, you know, a good introduction to, you know, our sense of this debate and how we need to move it forward. But clearly it's going to be an ongoing dialogue. So we started with a lovely poem. And we're going to end with a lovely poem. So if you'll indulge me, I'm just going to read out a poem, and this is from a lovely lady who's given us permission to share this, called Jenny Marrill. And the poem is actually called Beyond the Darkness, a New World Comes. Beyond the darkness, a new world comes. Beyond the far horizon, the sun will return again. Though darkness be with us now, its shadows will not remain. These dark times will depart at the coming of the sun. For always light follows darkness. Somewhere the dawn's begun. The spinning of the earth brings to us both darkness and light. As soon as the darkness begins, tomorrow is in sight. It may be a while yet before it's light and warm once more, but it is coming, for it has never failed to come before. Upon the hint of dawn's first light, we can begin to see the world tomorrow is bringing to us, to you and to me. It will not be yesterday, for that was a darkness ago, and what is coming after the dawn, we have yet to know. The dark night may have been a struggle so hard to get through, that the world coming with this dawn is so different and new. Perhaps the darkness changed many things, that we are now afraid, but in this new dawn, love can be found, a future remade. Thank you.
That's so beautiful. And I think we just wanted to mention that there is a working group, and you're very welcome to contact Rita if you're interested. You'll need to be an EMCC member if you are. And you can also engage with the Climate Coaching Alliance, and there's the website to join if you want to. So it's been lovely talking with you, but we would love to continue the dialogue. There's a lot to talk about and a lot to do.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for joining us. And it's been a great joy to host this conversation with Eve and Riza as ever. And we do hope that, you know, you will continue to get engaged and continue to think about these issues and, you know, really reflect. So thank you. Riza, final word from you, I think.
I think it really connects very well with the theme of the conference. There is designing the future. We got to start with ourselves and think about the rest. So, thank you, ladies. Thank you very much. So that was.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.